Good morning, everyone. I'd like to officially call to order the June 20th, 2016 meeting of the Finance and Audit Committee meeting. If we could all stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Well, our first item is the approval of the minutes, but I think we have to address one reality first, and that is our status as far as committee members. It looks like we do not have a quorum. David Smith just confirmed that. So really what we'll proceed with doing basically is just discussing the items and going from there. So we won't be able to officially take any votes. And so the approval of the minutes actually will, I guess, have to be deferred as well. So moving on to the next item on the agenda, that is public comment on agenda items, 3 minutes per speaker. We do have someone signed up for that, Mr. Gary Cloyd. Mr. Cloyd?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Gary Cloyd, 1402 East Chilkoot, also with the New North Transportation Alliance. This is in regards to item 2A and 2C with the 51X as it correlates with the upcoming related project that you're trying to approve at your next Board of Directors meeting, which would be in July. On the new Tampa service, there were some numbers that I thought were relative to this. Between the dates of October 1st through April 30th, the 51X had the highest number increase of weekday average. It went from 55 to 84. And therein lies the correlation of how Pasco County is going to see an increase with that new outlet mall and things of that nature, from residential to commercial. So hopefully you can get a consensus on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cloyd. Does anyone else from the public wish to address a specific agenda item before we move on? Okay. Seeing none, the next item on the agenda is presentation.
Did we do minutes?
What's that?
Minutes?
We can't do an approval of the minutes because we don't have quorum. Sorry. But yeah, so just to reiterate, we're going to review and discuss, but we're not going to take any actions. I'm sorry. So moving on to the presentation, we have Nicole Lauren. Did I get that right?
You did.
Thank you, Ms. Lauren.
You're welcome. Good morning. So I'm here today to provide an update on Pay for Performance and our Leadership Development Program.
Excuse me, Nicole, can you tell us your job title?
I can. My job title is Manager of HR Talent Acquisition and Organizational Development.
And you have been in that seat for how long now?
30 days?
Not that you're counting.
Yeah.
So Ms. Lauren,
Welcome,
came
welcome,
to us
and thank you.
As a project coordinator and hit her projects out of the park. So when we had an opening, we were delighted that she applied, and time to show off.
Okay, thank you. So we are transitioning, as you might see from this slide, to a pay-for-performance strategy. So what I'm going to briefly go over is what we've done so far and what we expect to do. So on this slide, you can see our project implementation team was established. We closed out the 2015 year, and we acted on the results of the compensation study. And on the next slide, I'll go into that a little bit. And coming up, we're going to begin the 2016 process with a mid-year review and a self and manager review, the year-end review process, compensation, calibration, and budget, where we'll take what we do for performance for the year and then calibrate both on the performance that we're rating folks on and on the actual pay we're suggesting, and close out discussions with the staff. Each of these phases has a toolkit because it is a bit of a paradigm shift for our organization. And as you can see from this kind of wheel here, it's an ongoing process, so this is us continuing this process on into the future. So 2016 mid-year, this is a simple, did we? Hold on a second. Oh, we're missing a slide, but that's okay. I can do it off of this one. Just want to elaborate a little bit on the completed tasks. So the project implementation team was established, and that was a group of mostly project coordinators here at HART, and their role was to help actually implement the year-end closeout, both from providing assistance to everyone, but also to help them to transition from thinking about simply pay for your tenure to pay for performance. So that team was critical to the success of this closeout in 2015, which we did and completed around March. At that point, you guys, I think, are aware of the compensation study that was done, and we took whatever actions we needed to take on that study, and that closed us out for 2015 and aligned us for 2016. So for 2016, we have another abbreviated process, and what I mean by that is that each employee and each manager will do a rating. They will do a rating of key attributes, which are just, what are the things or the attributes or the competencies that this employee is good at, and development areas, what do they need to work on. The employees will rate themselves, the managers will rate them. They will have a conversation about that so that they can have a meeting of the minds, and that will close out the mid-year. That will give them an opportunity both to continue with this kind of paradigm shift, but also to be ready at the end of the year so there's no surprises when they get to the annual review. They will provide a summary of the overall performance of the employee. So they'll be able to kind of say what's happening for the year regardless of what we did this time is we made it a little bit more loose than we will in the future as part of this shift. So it's a little bit free form. Later on, what we expect to do is to add in competencies and align it to the organizational objectives a little bit more than it is now. We have a scorecard out now, so we have a good idea of what's going on with what we need to do for performance. And that'll come a little later. This is almost kind of a warm-up to that in that they can be a little bit more free-form than they will be next year. So that process is happening in July. The employee and manager ratings are happening in July. And the leadership review and calibration is in August. So that will close out the mid-year portion of what we're doing, and then we'll be ready to go into year-end. Our year-end is a fiscal year-end, so we'll be ready for that calendar. Leadership development. So I think you guys received an update that we were working on a partnership with USF to provide a leadership development program to key employees in the company. We did do that. High potential leaders were identified. They went through a customized track with USF, which included 6 courses, and this allowed them to serve as champions for the agency for change management and organizational development initiatives. What was good about it is the group got to work together, so they got to share what they did cross-functionally in the org and then both and in USF as well. And what they're doing right now is they've completed all of their courses. They are working on their capstones. A couple of them have made some progress there, so they'll complete that. And with their capstones, their assignment was to take what they learned and then bring it here to HART and implement it in some way at HART. So an example of that is one of them took some of the retention initiatives that we have, and they're working on their capstone using both HART material and what they've learned to address that. When this is completed, we'll evaluate the program for success, and if it is successful and we think it's viable, we'll continue it. If not, we'll move on. We also have some other initiatives that have been happening in terms of leadership, and one example of that is the operations and training team offered a 3-day mid-level course for aspiring leaders in the organization. That was offered through Qatar. So that's had some good participation as well. We do expect to have DISC coming soon. Not sure who may or may not be familiar with DISC, but it is also a program that we use at the leadership level to help people identify kind of their strengths in various areas and leverage those strengths. Despite that, we do feel the need for an in-depth needs assessment for 2017 planning. So really being able to take what we're learning about the organization and its goals and what we're trying to do to drive performance and what competencies our leaders would need to head in that direction, and then making sure our leadership plan actually aligns with that. so the goal is to do an in-depth needs assessment. And this fancy slide, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it's just a reminder that what we do, the 2 items in black, are what we're talking about today. And that is really part of a much larger total reward strategy where we're looking at all the various things that both drive performance, retention, and engagement and align us to our organizational objectives. So that's what that slide's all about. And I believe that's all I have to cover. Should I ask if you have any questions? Sure.
I do. Thank you. This is terrific. Wow, it's great. I'm a big believer in leadership development within organizations, and I think Mr. Smith would concur with that. Since I see him at a lot of Leadership Tampa and Leadership Florida alumni, I assume I'll see you this weekend. Do we look at opportunities, or have we put anybody through Leadership Tampa? Or the Tampa Connection program, and then looking at also how we would identify people potentially for Leadership Florida, because when you look at some of the challenges we have from a standpoint, especially on our lobbying standpoint, in terms of connecting with people in Tallahassee and looking at what we're doing locally in terms of that, the connections and the relationships that you build through those community-based leadership programs are absolutely magnificent, and I can't encourage that enough. That is one of the best investments I think any organization can make. So I'm just curious as to is part of the strategy for this, or have we done it in the past? I just don't know. But
Yes, sir, we have. We have done. We've been very active with Leadership Hillsborough, and we've also done a lot with Emerge Tampa Bay. I believe this upcoming year we may have some candidates for Leadership Tampa. Probably the first time that we have done that. Just a different price point that we've been at previously. But you're absolutely right. The more we get plugged into these programs, the stronger we have our various relationships throughout our community. We've also done a lot of training within transit, focusing on our national opportunities, but not as much locally. So we are doing that, and we will continue to do so.
that's terrific, knowing that Leadership Tampa in particular focuses on transportation, usually has a day dedicated to that, and to be able to be a part of that and have our employees and our staff who are looking at leadership training and elevating through that. I think it's a golden opportunity for us to look at ways that we can take advantage of that, hopefully.
Lena
So,
Pettit
thank
had
you.
done Leadership Hillsborough this year, and she thought that we should be much stronger in their transportation days, so look for that investment.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd say coming from private sector, which is where I'm from, that's a unique thing for us. So, I mean, if I were just to take my past experience, that would not have come up. But that's some of the value of doing that needs assessment, because we can tailor it to what's going on with HART and come up with the opportunities we think are most important, and that one, of course, is high on the list. So.
Good.
Any other?
Yeah, I have one. Oh, first of all, thank you for a great presentation, and it is great to see merit-based, award, infused into a public agency governance system. Just a couple questions on, from a cost standpoint. I know that you mentioned that the development side, the leadership initiative we're doing with Cutter, and Cutter's a great organization. What a great partnership. But is there a cost associated with that development training or that mentoring?
Yeah, my understanding is that there's no cost associated. I will double check, but that there's no cost associated with the Cutter. That program is being offered basically free for us.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great answer. All right. Again, kind of back to the taxpayer dollar, and I think it never ceases to amaze me how HART staff and HART find ways to, even partnership with Cutter. The one bus away. That was a very cost efficient initiative, and it's great to see that being done again. Kudos. So thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Having heard. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, next we have, let's see. I think Mr. Seward is ready. We have Jeff Seward, our Chief Financial Officer, here to present on options for future revenue growth investment. What's that? Oh, yes, forgive me. I'm going to let Catherine introduce that
And
that
then
topic.
Then off to Mr. Seward.
Yeah.
At the June 6th board meeting, Commissioner Merman had raised a suggestion that half of our ad valorem be invested in capital. And Commissioner White seconded this. Director Bowers made an amendment to the motion, directing staff to investigate what it would look like if half our new revenue was going into capital. So the purpose today is to provide you the foundation for a broad discussion within the committee to see where it is you want to see the revenue going. Short version, we adopt a TDP, and almost without exception, what's in that TDP, we do. A third to half of our new ad valorem goes directly into service. But unlike the county, we are a one-trick pony. We are a transportation agency. We are essentially an employment entity that consumes petroleum products to deploy service. So we don't choose between dog catching and transportation. We choose between different flavors of transportation, and anything not going on the street for transportation is going into the bank for transportation, or it's transportation support. So in that universe, the finance team has been doing an awful lot of slicing and dicing to show different ways to look at how we have been making investments. There's been a lot of very positive feedback from this board, especially since the turn of the recession, of how to continue to be good stewards of public funds. So we want to give you the information so you can bring this up to the board and get our policy aligned where you want it to be to continue to reinforce the excellent work that staff is doing, but making sure that service is getting out there in a way that you are happy to see it put together.
So just to recap, so this is since Director Merman's action, or Commissioner Merman's action, this is kind of, there was the look into that
Yes.
request,
Yes, sir.
this information. Okay, thank you.
Good morning, Jeff Seward, Chief Financial Officer for HART. I won't go over this. Ms. Egan presented the purpose of this morning's presentation. At a high level, looking at two aspects of the proposed policy. One is the impact over our planned financial strategy over the next 5 years based on where we are right now budgetarily. The second piece is kind of taking a step back from that proposed policy and looking at how those dollars are currently being spent and have been being spent over the last 5 years. So you can see the proposal and the impact, and then you can look at what we're actually doing right now and look at that as a comparison. So just as a quick recap of our revenue makeup as an organization, this is the percentages don't change that much year from year. This is really from the 2017's proposed budget presentation, but the percentages of what our revenue streams are stay pretty static from year to year. So as you see, one of the biggest discussions, 51% of our revenue is from ad valorem, from property tax. So we are very much reliant on that as an operating revenue source. So since we're in a few more slides, we're going to take a look back in history. I wanted to just show where we have grown since this discussion is about the growth of additional revenue. Wanted to show you exactly what those revenue streams have looked like cumulatively over the last 5 years as far as additional growth. So ad valorem over that period of time has grown $7.4 million. Passenger fares, 3.1. Total of our revenues over the last 5 years have grown $10 million. So that number is important as we get to the very last slide, and I'll refer back to this when I get there, of showing how much we have accumulated in additional revenue growth, and specifically where HART has invested that additional $10 million over that same period of time. Now, first, I'd like to talk about the impacts of the potential policy of 50% of all additional ad valorem growth being set aside specifically for capital improvement. So there are two different lenses to look through as far as the impact is concerned. The first one, as you know, each year, and we've talked about this every budget year, is our goal to recalibrate the federal formula funding from capital from operating, where we as an organization back in the 2007-2008 timeframe dedicated that due to the downturn in the economy and the loss of ad valorem revenue. So I don't like using the word plug. I look at it as a need to be able to maintain the service levels at that time. So that decision was made. However, as ad valorem has grown, and you saw on the previous slide that it has been growing, we want to supplant that capital, that formula capital or operating investment back to capital so we can invest those federal formula dollars back into the capital, which most transit agencies utilize that funding for. So the first scenario you see here is keeping that federal calibration intact. If you go down to the 1, 2, 3, 4 line, you'll see it says formula. If you go across year to year, you'll see starting in FY18, we go down $1 million a year. Again, that isn't the anticipating a loss of revenue, it's a redirection of revenue to capital. So, shifting 50% of ad valorem to CIP, starting in the current, or in, let's just say in FY17, we start to grow that red bottom line quite substantially, keeping that federal formula intact. Now again, this is a model. It's based on where the state currently sees ad valorem going over the next 5 years. And the state is much more positive than our models typically are. We are very conservative, trying to keep a 3.5 to 4% growth rate. The state, in some cases, is looking at an entire 8% growth rate per year for the next 5 years. We modeled that in here just because that's what right now other entities such as Hillsborough County, they're using that state model for all of their out-year modeling right now for different transportation fundings. Also, we are looking at a true growth in operating costs. Right now, we average right around 5.8 to 6.1% per year in additional operating cost growth. That is incorporated in this model as well, just to try to give a more truism type of model for you to look at. So again, it's a model. Would we keep it intact? Would we not keep it intact? Would we tweak our operating? All those things would come into play, but this is just a very 30,000-foot high-level view of the impact of shifting it with it intact. If we were not to keep it intact, meaning we would keep the federal formula coming into operating during that time period, obviously you see the impact of shifting that 50% of ad valorem growth to capital is much less of an impact than it was otherwise. It may look, and I agree as a government finance professional, it does look like there are some shells being moved around. And to be able to maintain service levels and to maintain the growth of the TDP as we are now, it will require the movement of those shells, of moving revenue from capital to operating, operating to capital, and back and forth. So we do it already, but I wanted to show you what the impact was going to be if we kept the recalibration intact or we didn't.
Just to verify, Jeff, both of those slides account for 50%, the proposed shift of 50%?
50% of the ad valorem growth, anticipated ad valorem growth each year. Yes,
Okay, so yeah, both slides will reflect
going to capital. Yes.
That assumption, if you will. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So we can come back to these two, but I wanted to shift the lens and look at, and 2 more slides, at the historic comparisons. What have we been doing as an organization when it comes to these revenue sources? So you'll see this slide 3 more times, but I focus on a different aspect of this slide at each discussion point. So the first part, the yellowed area, is our history over time with those revenues. The pie chart that you saw, that $10.03 million of growth, this is where it has been distributed over the last 5 years since 2012. Now, in 13, 14, and 15, actually 13, 14, 15, and 16, we already shifted ad valorem to CIP. Even though we do have a majority federally funded capital program, there are requirements to either match, or if we just don't have enough federal formula funding, we shift ad valorem over to be able to pay for capital. So in those years, we have allocated about $2.5 million from ad valorem to CIP to support our CIP projects and infrastructure to supplement the federal funding that we receive through grants. The next highlighted area it shows specifically the additional revenues over that same time period. So as the first line is ad valorem as an example. It reflects that first pie graph that you saw, a $7.4 million increase in ad valorem during that time period, and then each of the revenue sources is broken down. You get to the bottom of a $10.3 million increase over that time period. So this slide, this yellow highlight, is probably the most important and most impactful of the discussion. This is what we have actually been doing with those revenues. As you see, and we showed this slide at the FY17 proposed budget discussion, we have added additional service in 13, 14, 15, 16, and anticipated in 17. Right below that is the percent of that service compared to overall service. So as an example, in 2017, we are looking at an increase of 5.2% to our service model. That's wheels on the street. Go to the very bottom. Service increase as percent of increase over last year's ad valorem increase. So what that means, we are anticipating a $1.7 million increase in ad valorem. The service increase represents 64.4% of that ad valorem increase. Does that make sense?
Yeah, if I could read, the way that I see that is it basically says that our increasing service is largely dependent upon our ad valorem growth. Like 64% of it is dependent upon that ad valorem growth. Is that right? Is that a correct interpretation?
Yes, sir. The increase in service is absolutely enabled by that increase in ad valorem. If that increase in ad valorem did not exist, we would do our best to try to get that 6.5% increase in service, or 5.2% increase in service, but it would be much more problematic.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, another point to remember is a bus will cost about $480,000, and we will spend approximately $3 million operating that bus, if not more. So in the most basic sense, $1 of capital is still going to take $6 to operate that asset. And that is something else which makes us a little different from a traditional agency that builds things and has a capital-intensive budget. So we would love to get more capital, but to the extent that it constrains our ability to maximize the assets we already have through a service budget, we just want to bring that to your attention.
I think that's thank you. An important relationship to call out to, and as we move forward with the board, $1 of capital requires $6 in operating. I mean, we can't forget that. So, yeah, thank you.
To the right, there's a synopsis of this information. So over 5 years, we've added $5.5 million of service. We've seen a $7.4 million increase in ad valorem. And we've invested that growth in service, that cost of that growth of service, has utilized 75% of that ad valorem growth over that same period of time. So the takeaway is exactly as Chairman Melendez mentioned. That ad valorem growth and our ability to achieve the TDP enhancement, and again, we're just talking about the enhancement, the status quo component of it, is, I know it says 75%, but I'll take a leap and say 100%, reliant on our ability to utilize that growth in ad valorem revenue to invest in that service. So if we go back, I skipped over this slide, but I wanted to come back to it. Right now, this is the projected, and this is what we're basing the FY17 proposed budget and what we have done historically is the recalibration. This is what we've already planned on doing. And on the non-calibration, or on the calibration model, this is the path that we would follow. As you see, we started at a high of 2012, 98% of the federal formula funding went to operating. In 2016, it's down to 76%, and we're looking at dropping it even further into 2017's proposed budget, allowing that money to be shifted to capital, which that capital then gets supported by the ad valorem growth that we invest in service. So when it's all said and done, we are utilizing that ad valorem growth for investment in new service. It isn't going necessarily to overhead, although part of it does go to overhead because we have our service component, then we have the function of the organization that supports the service on the street component. But without that ad valorem growth being able to be invested back into service, our service model would probably look the same now as it will next year, the year after, and so on.
Mr. Jacobs?
Thank you. And spreadsheets, I'm doing my best to follow you. But my question is a more 50,000 foot level in terms of, so as we grow our service level based on what you're talking about here, what is the general percentage of capital investment that we have to keep investing in order to continue to service the growth? You see what I'm saying? That it's one thing to have capital projects, but if we're going to grow service level on this level, you obviously have to grow capital investment as well. And is there a formula that grows that we have to do beyond what we're talking about here, just by saying let's move 50% over into capital investment? But what is typically do we have to do? I mean, if we got more buses on the road, we got to put into place more service, more hours of service, more manpower, all of those things. I'm assuming in order to support the operations, you have to have that in place. And I assume that grows at a certain rate as a percentage versus what the percentage of the operational growth is. Am I kind of getting it right, or
so it's got a bunch of moving parts, not to make a transit show. Probably the best thing for us to do is grab the TDP, the action plan, and just look at the next 5 years and break that out, because again, the buses, they're $480,000, but we run them for 12 years, whereas a van could be anywhere from $50,000 to $70,000, if not less. We run that for 5. So depending on where we're investing, in the actual capital on the street, that is one component. Another thing we brought up to the board, and previously, and we'll be talking about it more, we are constrained for space in East Tampa. We could restripe and add capacity for maybe 8 to 10 more full-size buses, but each van we add takes away from that. And even adding those vehicles does not add maintenance capacity. So there is no room at the end. So as we're looking for growth, we really are talking, and next year's budget will include a study on this, what will be the cost and the recurring overhead for us when we go to a second facility. And we imagine that would be a van facility. That's less expensive. It lets us specialize. But if we don't grow to a second facility, we cannot grow rush hour service. So there are a few different things to look at. We will go ahead and do the 5 years on the TDP of what we say we will do, but we can also go and look at the vision plan, which is what we had built to support the Go Hillsborough initiative, and show just the difference there on what a capital-intensive program can do to let us grow. So it is almost a chicken and the egg. With our service model, we have to have the ad valorem free to be able to run service, but lacking an external boost, such as the Federal Bus Facility Program, to help us build a second facility, we're still going to be constrained for growth. So we'll get you both of those different flavors on the TDP to show you what that looks like.
And does the growth in service based on our fleet capabilities, just our physical fleet, are we keeping up? Are we able to keep up under the plan we're talking about here in replacing vehicles, or what kind of strain does that put on the life of a vehicle itself in terms of do we require more hours of operation of a vehicle in order to maintain that service, and what does that do to the useful life of the vehicle versus doing it at a standard process? I'm just curious of that.
Okay. With the spreadsheet, let me draw your attention to, on the right-hand side on the bottom of the last slide, you see 5 years service, $5.5 million. So that $5.5 million of service that was added to our service model was existing fleet resources. I mean, we did not add a bus. We did not add a new bus. We are utilizing our current fleet to absorb the service expansion off the enhanced TDP plan. To do that, a lot of the capital investment that you see is for the sustaining of our fleet. We have a large component of our capital budget that is for transmissions and engines. Even our streetcar fleet. We have a robust capital program this year to be able to maintain that fleet. Because we're definitely not going to go out and buy new, I said definitely, I shouldn't have said that. I said most likely we'll not go out and buy new vehicles, but we will keep that fleet up. So to maintain the way it exists right now without being able to add more buses to our service profile out at 21st Avenue, it is incumbent upon us to invest a lot of our CIP funding into the maintenance of that fleet. Fortunately, we have a fantastic fleet maintenance manager and fleet maintenance program that's able to do that. However, we are working very diligently on replacing those diesel buses much more rapidly than we thought we could. That's the plan, to move them quickly with additional federal funding. But there isn't a one-for-one match on the enhancement to the capital side. It's what we can afford the next year, what buses are reaching their useful life and need to have an engine and transmission swapped out. That's how we're doing it right now.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Greeno.
So unfortunately, Commissioner Berman, who started this conversation, isn't here, but trying to give a little bit of, I think, benefit of the doubt in terms of what her intentions were. I think it seems like her intentions were mostly, look, we're going to get extra revenue. Let's not just throw it into the soup. Let's sit back and think about what we're going to do with it. And there's probably a little bit of let's make sure we have some of our increase in revenue saved for a rainy day. Hard to argue with the rainy day fund. I think that we do that. The first one, though, let's make sure that we save some of our increased revenue and it doesn't kind of go in the soup or disappear or become the subject of appropriation shenanigans like is typical in the government process. I think that's a very admirable objective. The problem is that's a very unsophisticated approach to budgeting and planning. And I guess if you have a very undisciplined governmental body that changes, the objectives change year to year, and there's games with budgeting and appropriation, that you probably need that relatively prophylactic discipline to apply. Here, it seems as though we have a pretty sophisticated organization with fairly well-defined objectives that does a fairly good job planning 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years in the future, and that something that sort of prophylactic or general would really be a hindrance to this organization's activities, and I'd just like to go on the record with that statement.
Thank you, Mr. Greeno.
Question?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Oh,
Mr.
I'm sorry, was he done?
I am done.
Okay.
You
okay,
are
we're
done.
good.
Okay.
I just had a couple questions, comments. Overall, I think when Director Merman made that motion, my thinking was it sounded good, and then thinking about it, and especially what you had said before and you reiterated today was, a bus is $500,000 and it takes about $3 million over the useful life to operate it. So me liking to convert to numbers, that's roughly 17% capital, 83% operations. So looking back to the chart, the current formula split chart, and I'm looking how it's gone from 89% operating in 2011 down to 76%, and from 11% capital in 2011 down to 24%. I kind of see that we've kind of actually, gone actually over that 83-17 split, and I'm not so much interested anymore looking at those numbers because I can see that we've done above and below, and in the whole scheme of things change from year to year. Your capital needs, it may be you need a bus facility. Obviously you need some of the infrastructure to support that. But overall, I think rather than looking at what the split of capital to operating is, what we need to look at is, are we taking that increase in revenue and making the best, are we growing the ridership? Are we putting more service out in the street, the most that we can do? And then the other comment when she made that I was thinking of is we need to make sure we have the TDP always in the forefront, which I think we do. I mean, obviously you've tied the budget to it in the last 3-4 years, and so that has been coming along. So, totally on board with everything that's been going on. The only thing that came to mind during this, not the only thing, but one of the things that came to mind was we obviously do not have the funding to get some of the projects in our current TDP out on the street. But maybe what we do have is some of the later years, we have some of the less capital intensive projects, such as maybe a circulator or new flexes. So maybe as we look in the coming months at the new TDP, perhaps we can pull up some of those less capital-intensive projects sooner, so we can at least, start getting more service on the streets. I mean, I would love to get the East-West Metro Rapid funded, but in the absence of that, maybe that's something that we look at, is just reprioritizing some of those less capital-intensive projects. But again, just going through this, I'm not so much sure. I know we need to focus on having the capital available, but I think the main thing is getting the service on the street and kind of making sure that the schedule maybe in the TDP is optimized to do that. That's where possible.
Okay. Thank you,
So
Director.
good presentation.
Thank you, Director.
Yeah, I
Mr.
just
Freeman?
want to say I agree with Director Feroce. This is really a budgeting issue, and we just need to make sure that we plan appropriately, and that our capital projects are planned and our service enhancements are planned. And if we do a good job doing that, we certainly don't need any high-level prophylactic rules that constrain what we do. But it does put the impetus on us to do a good job planning, I think. And to that extent, I do agree that we probably could spend a little more time talking about sort of TDPs and what the actual plan for enhancing service and for making capital investments are. I certainly wouldn't mind seeing that.
And for this year's TDP, since we were dealing with the universe where we didn't know what would happen on the county side, so on and so forth, the plan had been to take essentially last year's, refresh of our current data. For next year will be a major update for us. It's required by DOT. We have it budgeted to have consultant support. So it gives us an opportunity not just to look at the capital, but almost blow up what it means to have a transit system here in Tampa, because we definitely see good return on investment with technology. New technology is emerging. We're in good conversation with DOT about trying to talk them into an autonomous vehicle pilot program, and that gives us more technology to have available and more opportunities to work with private partners, that we don't have to take a year and a half to buy the bus. We can contract quickly for a different type of vehicle, which we then don't have to maintain. So I think next year we can have some excellent conversations on how to do it differently, how to take the things which we have been talking about and get them actually into implementation. Yes, sir.
Okay. Any other questions? Mr. Stewart, thank you. Just one comment. I think, obviously there was no action required on this item today. It was more of just a presentation. But as far as plans for the next board meeting, would be basically just reiterate this presentation to the board. Is that the intent? Okay.
Can I suggest just a little bit more of relating what we're doing in the future with additional revenue increases to what our plan is, so that we can see that we do have some idea what we're doing. We don't need a random savings account, so to speak.
And that's kind of what I was thinking was, I think the slides are great, and the way that you highlighted the different sections. I think maybe at the end, maybe add some declarative statements or conclusions or some, even a recommendation or a summary of impacts, if you will. Just something so that when we get to the board, it's very clear, what the result was. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Next we have, let's see, legislative presentation on legislative services contracts, procurement overview. Mr. Al Burns, Director of Procurement and Contracts Administration.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Al Burns, Director of Procurement and Contracts Administration for HART.
Good morning.
This morning, I'd like to go over the legislative services contract options. As you may or may not be aware, that the option for this comes up for renewal in December of this calendar year. Historical current federal legislative consultant services contract is with Holland and Knight. It expires in December of this year. Also, the advocacy group contract expires in this year. HART procurement policy states the authority may use a competitive solicitation process or informal competitive process in obtaining legislative, consulting, and legal services. In preparation for this, the Board of Directors shall appoint an ad hoc committee to oversee the selection process. If a competitive solicitation process is used, the ad hoc committee shall follow the process designated in Section 3207 below. If an informal competitive process is used, the shall follow the process designated in 02.2 below. The differences. The use of competitive solicitation process is basically the RFR, request for proposal solicitation method. We establish the factors to use for the evaluation of the services. We publicly announce the release of the solicitation. We provide interested firms with a copy of the RFP. We evaluate the proposals, rank and recommend in order of preference. The Board of Directors shall inquire of qualified firms as to the basis of recommendation, select one of the firms recommended by the ad hoc committee, and negotiate a contract. The use of the informal solicitation process, very abbreviated and for brevity, is basically the board where the ad hoc committee would select 3 firms to go out and solicit from. The following decisions need to be made. The solicitation method, competitive or informal. Formation of the ad hoc committee, 3 members, chair oversees selection process. The term of the contract. Evaluation committee members, staff, and outside members, if you like. Presentations to the full board by highest ranked firm. Staff recommendation. Staff recommends that you go through the competitive solicitation process. 1 RFP for both state and federal legislative services. Evaluation criteria includes technical and price, rated with 80% technical, 20% price. 1 contract for each consultant. 1 contract for state, 1 contract for federal. Also very important is coterminous contracts, meaning they both end at the same time. The ad hoc committee in 2014 consisted of Fran Davin, Commissioner Sandy Merman, and you, Mr. Melendez. Any questions?
All right. I have a few questions, but Mr. Carino?
Thank you. So mine go kind of high level, and I know I haven't had perfect attendance here this year, but did I miss the conversation where we decided if we wanted to procure legislative services and what our objectives would be if we did?
So this is that conversation. Thank you for the question. We have exercised the 2 years on the base. We have 2 one-year options, as I understand. On the federal side, we have had a substantive change to the team. Jeff Booth has left Holland and Knight and moved into his role as his own contractor. That happened within the first year of the term. He had a 1-year agreement with Holland and Knight, which has since expired, and we have not had a lot of information about where that agreement stands. Just put it that way. So I think it behooves us to recommend to the board at a minimum to go back out on the street for the federal solicitation. From a staffing perspective, I don't know if Cesar Hernandez is here, if Marco is here. I see both hands. Oh, one hand. Now that we've added Cesar to the team, we've got an asset who's been spending a lot more time speaking to our lobbyists, both in Tallahassee and in D.C., and speaking to our peer agencies and seeing what deliverables may or may not have been within the contracts. The board does not have to go on the street for either of these. We would at a minimum recommend federal. Given that we've also changed the team, we do want the board to have the opportunity to discuss whether or not it is appropriate to exercise the option. David had made this point a few weeks ago. Previous boards were usually presented with options, which is another conversation we'll have today, when you had to exercise them or go without contractual representation. So we wanted to have that conversation today with enough time that if the board chooses not to exercise the options, we're golden, but if the board wants to, that we have the time, especially on this, to get a team in by the beginning of sessions.
So I was heading in a slightly different direction. This is a presentation about how we go about rehiring, hiring, soliciting. I feel like it's time we had a little bit of a conversation, and of course, Ms. Shanahan always is very vocal about this topic. A little bit of a conversation about whether we're getting what we paid for, whether we actually need this representation at both the state and federal level. And if so, and I suspect that at some level we'll come down and say, yes, we're getting value somewhere along the line for this, but then maybe try to narrow it down, try to come up with what our legislative objectives are. And then I think as we go out to market to find who would be the best representative, when we have the objectives defined, I think that certain groups or teams will prove to be better at certain things than others. And I feel like again, I may have missed it, so I apologize, but I feel like we should probably have some version of the conversation about if we want to re-engage or have a legislative consultant, and then if so, what we really want to get out, what we've gotten out of them, and what we really want to get out of them, just to refine that process a little bit.
Mr. Roche?
Yeah, I totally agree with what you were saying, and I had spoken with Caesar, and I wish I would have had a better meeting with him, but he did send me some information on our federal lobbyists, and sent me some information on, in the last few years, what we have actually gotten out of our federal lobbyists. Correct me if I'm wrong, Caesar is in the room, right? Yeah, okay. In 2014, we had a $4.8 million ferry grant, and then there wasn't anything until 2010 where we got anything earmarks. And maybe Caesar could tell me if I'm wrong in the definition of earmarks. That would have been above and beyond the federal formula, Ms. Egan. So this would be money that we could attribute towards our federal lobbyist, the work that they had done.
Yeah, it would be okay if Caesar came up, and I don't necessarily, I didn't intend to sort of hijack this conversation, but at the same time,
Well,
I think
I had intended to bring it
great
up.
conversation,
Yeah.
and I've worked with Caesar a little bit too, and I like him, and I don't want to kind of spoil your plans, so to speak, but I do want to have a good conversation about what we can do internally, what we really need external folks for, and what our objectives and our outcomes have been before we go into kind of how we're going to hire somebody.
And I think it's safe to say Caesar's probably the past 6 to 8 weeks been spending an awful lot of time on this to be able to have this conversation.
If you're not prepared today, I mean, certainly I'm happy to have it happen
absolutely.
at a later date where you could do a little bit more presentation, or if you'd like to, just kind of stand up and give us an ad hoc presentation.
I mean,
that's great
definitely,
too.
whatever questions that you do have, and I have answers to them, I'm more than happy to speak on that. So if there are some questions that you have, I know that Director Jarosh has asked for earmark history on the federal level, so I was able to send that over to her. Full disclosure, I just came on board, right? So came on in November and had about a month not really to prepare to go into legislative session in Tallahassee, which was a bit rushed because of the election cycle this year. Likewise, we're still within our federal asks, so we still, for this year, aren't going to be able to kind of see where our ROI is as far as our federal legislative consultants. Our next grant that we're submitting is on the 24th. We have yet to hear of the past 3 that we have been able to apply for this federal legislative session. So there are a lot of variables, emerging variables in the air to be able to come back and say, well, this is what's been able to happen. And earmarks have been done away with, right? So there is nothing as far as on the federal lobbying side that you can say, well, they've been able to do this now because it's the game has kind of changed, where we have to be a bit more strategic as to how we rally support, get letters of support, get some intimate time with specific members of the executive cabinet and the president's administration. So things are changing on the federal level, and I think that we need to change as well. We need to also evolve the way that we strategically go after certain resources. So, but with that being said, if you have any questions, by all means.
Did somebody have a question?
Well, I just wanted to say
Sure.
that above and beyond what we get through our formula grant, just, since the earmarking process ended in around 2010-11, that's probably the reason why, and I'm not here to cast any aspersions on our current federal lobbyists. I think they've done a great job. But I just think, kind of we're in a new era of getting federal dollars, at least. Maybe the state has remained the same. And so just looking back in the last 5 years, 2014 would have been the $4.8 million ferry grant. And I don't know how much of that we can say, is attributable to the fact that we had a hired lobbyist, or the fact that we wrote up a really great grant application and maybe, there weren't as many out there. So, I'm not ready to say we shouldn't hire a federal lobbyist, but I think the conversation to that might be helpful is, we've got Caesar now, maybe
I'd love
maybe
to see
we
a
don't need.
presentation about,
Yeah.
what our strategies and objectives
Exactly.
are for both state and
Exactly.
federal.
I think he's done, and I have to commend him for doing an excellent job. And in a couple of years, maybe he will have that knowledge to where we can do it all in house. Because it's just like all our other. We're looking more at subcontracting some service. Maybe we bring some service back in, and it might be in that.
Just a quick housekeeping note then, Mr. Jacobs and Catherine, did you want to add something before I comment?
It sounds like what would be useful, and we'll of course await the rest of the committee's comment, but some level of brief overview. Ideally, we do have to move quickly for this, but for the July 18th board meeting, we had reached out to other properties, and one in particular, one that comes to mind is Sacramento, that had chosen this exact approach. They've had a government relations staff in pocket for several years that has built very strong relationships, at least on the DC side. And so their approach, instead of a traditional blanket lobbying firm, was to focus much more narrowly on a resource that could help write Tiger grants and make these particular transportation connections, but they spent an awful lot of time on constituent service. So we do have some options. I would just, from a high level, the change that we did want to talk about today, procurement-wise, is in previous years, we had actual board members as the evaluation committee on this item. 2 years ago, Commissioner Beckner, if I am not incorrect, removed himself from the panel because of potentials for conflict of interest, and he was evaluating firms that in an election year might be dealing with them. So we did want to make sure that we get a consensus or some sense from the committee. If the board would like to proceed that way, we certainly can, but we think you would be much more comfortable and much more isolated from any conflict if we change the process. I'll defer back to Al very quickly.
Thank you, ma'am. I spoke to David and I also spoke to Jeff about the ad hoc committee. And what I'd like to recommend, if we move forward with the solicitation process for state and federal, or either, is that one person or one member from this committee act in an oversight manner rather than having to form a ad hoc committee and put that additional layer. The same process was used for legal services. I wanted to say Councilman Virgin, I believe, sat and he just monitored the process, just made sure that everything was a level playing field was adhered to, and that the procurement process was kept intact. So that would be the one recommendation that I would make versus having to set up a legislative ad hoc committee. That just one member from this committee act as the, for lack of better terms, oversight. Correct me if I'm wrong, David.
Our concern was that we have a committee comprised of board members that evaluates and recommends, and our appellate body, when we have an issue with respect to a procurement, is that very board. I'm a little concerned with that arrangement. I'd rather you either have one board member who monitors or no board members. It can come to the board for an appropriate review, interviews with whomever you want to interview, and assuming we want to, in fact, retain lobbyists, you can make those decisions. So we'd like to maintain the process so that it is not potentially flawed.
Comment?
Yeah, well,
Mr. Jacobs?
okay. In response, yes, I agree with you. I think that's a good strategy that I think keeps us all above board. As if we're dealing with public money, then we have to do it in a way that there is no chance whatsoever, or as least a chance whatsoever, to see any improprieties or favoritism or anything that usually people look for in that. So I think that that's a good strategy, and I encourage us to go in that direction. I also wanted to comment on the importance of representation within the governing bodies, whether it's on the federal level or the state level. I mean, I think the scorecard, and we have to make sure we keep our eye on, and again, that the scorecard isn't just how much money they bring in, but how much we protect of what we're getting already, the relationships we're building, who's carrying our issues up there on our behalf, and how are we building those relationships with those legislators that are doing that we can go to and count on to help us either procure in the proper methodology the funds that we need or grants that we need, but also protecting the ones we have in place now in the federal money. As we know, going into an election cycle, anything is fair game, and I want to make sure that in the competitive process up there, because if we're not up there walking the halls, somebody else is, and they're going after our bucket of money. And so how do we look at the best strategy in which we can employ, a team or a representation up there to make sure that we got all the bases covered throughout the whole thing. So I think that's important to consider as we go through this as well, what our overall strategy, what you were talking about, Brian.
Yeah, and I agree with Director Jacobs. It's a little bit challenging. I'd love to sit in this committee and make the choice, but I have a connection to probably 75% of the law firms that we'd be talking to, so it wouldn't work for me. But I guess I would feel comfortable having the staff, drive that decision potentially with some oversight, as long as I felt like our decisions, objectives were clear, and our decision-making criteria were relatively well laid out and tied to what we expect to get from this. I mean, unlike legal services where it's vague and we don't really know what's going to come up and we have to sort of guess at who's going to be the best at answering things that are presented in front of us from time to time. Here, I look at it more like we're choosing a contractor to build a building, and we have to figure out what the building looks like, and then we can go look for the person who is best to build the building that we want built. And as long as the board has some role in, so to speak, what the building looks like, I'm absolutely fine with the staff making those decisions.
Any other? Okay.
Yeah,
Mr. Rose.
and totally agree with the comments. Maybe what the board can get more involved in, or I can't recall. I don't think I wasn't on the ad hoc committee, but in both processes it says that you have to establish the factors for use of the evaluation services, and I think that kind of may go in line with what you're talking about, defining the objectives. So if we, maybe had a look as a board at those, had a crack at that, maybe the staff presents it, and then we can kind of massage it a little bit, and then just leave it up to staff, and we totally agree with that process.
Okay. Obviously, just a quick. Yeah, go ahead.
Just to jump on that, I don't know, Al, if there is a model with some of the other local agencies like the Aviation Authority. I just went through a solicitation process as an architect with the food and beverage contracts out there, and their review and interviewing and selection committee was made up of staff, and staff then made the recommendations based on the submissions and the presentations and brought it back to their board, and their board made a final decision on what the awards were. And I don't know if that's the model you're looking for, but I know there's other agencies here locally that use a model, I think, of what you're talking about, and I think to quite some success, quite honestly.
Very good point, sir, and I concur with that 100%. One of the things that the procurement department here has been doing, we've been meeting with the airport, the city of Tampa, the county, procurement directors, myself, we've all been kind of talking here of late, and we're kind of grabbing ideas from each other. And this process for this is very similar to the one that I believe that the airport has used, and that the county has used as well.
Okay. Mr. Smith.
Having had the pleasure of serving as general counsel for the Aviation Authority for 13 months during that process, that's what has led to some of these conversations. We had 4 bid challenges. When you have those, it really causes you to focus on the processes you have to have in place. And if you don't have the correct processes in place, you risk liability. So we're going to make sure we have that. There's obviously going to have to be a very significant discussion with respect to what do we want from a lobbyist and how do we figure that out in terms of the criteria. It's very difficult. Sometimes a legislator desires something that HART does for maybe an agency he represents. No dollars are involved, but lots of significant issues are at stake. But nonetheless, I think it's pretty clear what you want. You want to have a clear understanding of what we're looking for, how to evaluate it, and then how to select the right person once those factors are decided.
Anyone else?
I will say this, Mr. Chair, and I don't know if it's appropriate or not, so I'll defer to David. Mr. Hernandez did provide me a copy for the scope of work or the technical requirements for both state and federal. He provided that to me around 2 o'clock, let's say, on Friday. I'm not sure if that's something that's appropriate to go out to the committee or not, but that is something that he has been working on diligently over the course of the last 3 or 4 months.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Just a few comments. Actually, I'll begin with that. I think it would be appropriate to, if everyone's comfortable receiving that information on this committee. We want to be as prepared as possible for a board discussion. So,
and if I may jump in on that one, I'd really like us to circle back not to be the wet blanket, but please let us circle back with GC and all of the rest of our procurement implications. This would be the one solicitation that the board would be looking at and saying yes, no, maybe so, as opposed to all the other solicitations we do, which have individual conversations, making sure we hear information going back and forth. So please just let us circle back and make sure that by sending the scope out, because once we send it to you, it becomes public record. So any firms that would be coming into bid could or could not grab that and have some level of competitive advantage, et cetera, et cetera. So just
To be clear, I was not advocating
Okay.
that we actually define the scope of the procurement, right, RFP. It's more, what are the objectives?
yeah, and,
Well,
and let me
From the board
yes.
point of view, I don't know if folks were saying something different, but I don't know
Well, and
if
we can
that's what we
transmit
intended to
the
say.
adopted legislative objectives from this year from the legislative committee and the board. We'll do that with the weekly this week. And I believe we were looking at trying to convene the legislative committee to the extent that folks are available prior to next board meeting. If not, we'll be doing that. So we can get you that ahead of time. I believe what I heard was talking about sending the scope as is being drafted, and I would just really like to circle back and make sure that we want to do
Well,
that.
I'd like to clarify something. I thought we were referring to the existing scope that's on the books, which would be my understanding is already public record.
Of course, yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
So-
not the draft scope. That we're-
Yeah, my intent
Okay.
was, I was not
Okay.
endorsing or
I take
acknowledging
back
that
all
we
my
would send
panic.
something proposed, right?
Panic gone.
Yeah, because obviously, yeah, it's
trying
a
to hold it
competitive
together,
bid.
Jeff.
Yeah. So, well, unless there's any other comments, I have a few things I'd like to go over. I think the first is, okay, so just to clarify on the scope, we will not be sending out any proposed scope, or that's obviously, if something was sent out, it would be something that was already accessible by the public. So just so everyone's clear. Quick rewind. Going back to the slide on the staff recommendation, I just kind of want to go back to 30,000 feet and just point something out that I heard, Catherine, you iterate. This is kind of a general overarching slide over two different procurements. And Catherine, if I heard you correctly, you were recommending and kind of endorsing revisiting the federal side, but I think it would be important. But I did not hear that on the state side. So I think if everyone's comfortable with this, I think the slide should actually be kind of split. There should be a discussion or a presentation on what does staff recommend. Do we recommend the federal go to competitive process? And if you have a position on the state side, because I did not hear the same for both. I think it's so important. We have to distinguish between the two because everything we've talked about up to this point has been all federal, and it's not apple. It is apples and oranges.
Since we've had a change to the way that contract was put together, we definitely have strong material reasons to want to come back for federal. 1.2 stress. We did go out for federal and state together last time to give firms an option to bid on both. So looking at that previous process, if we wanted to use that to preserve the ability for a firm to do both and be able to leverage, because there are firms that operate in both spheres, we would by default be going back out. And as much as I individually really enjoy working with the advocacy group, I think we would be negligent if we didn't look at both options to bring them back. So while we have a strong reason to look at federal, I mean, we would recommend against going back with federal just because the team has changed. If we're looking at one, we need to be looking at both.
Are we saying we're obligated to look at both?
Well, you're obligated to do what you want to do. We don't have to. We can exercise options, but if we're looking at one, it's easier to say. It is much easier for me with Mitch Perry sitting in the back of the room to say that we're going forth and doing a full evaluation of both than having to say we're looking at one, but the other is special.
Yeah, I just want to make this note, and coming from the consulting world, all the discussion's been on the federal side, and I think sounds like you've been pleased with the advocacy group. I know as a board member I have, and I think lumping them into this when they, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a contract renewal on the table that we have not exercised. Is that correct?
We have 2 one-year options on both contracts. Yes,
on
sir.
both contracts. So we have it sounds like an issue. I think Caesar, you may even kind of brought it up. That it's different now. Correct. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but and we've talked about the federal side has changed. I'm sympathetic to the fact that as a consultant, when you're under contract, there are implications just by virtue of having that contract and how it's dealt with upon renewal. Or if you go back out, you have again, I'm kind of saying this generally, not just for the advocacy group, but any consultant, if they have the opportunity to be renewed and they're not, kind of the first question that comes up in people's minds is, why not? And I say that as a consultant. So I think that we should be sensitive to the fact that, and again, I think this even speaks to possible, not that they would, but if we do something, we should do it with transparency and intent. So I just want to clarify that I do see a distinction between the federal and the state, and I think that if we don't renew, as an example, the state, then we should do so with good cause, and we should actually talk about, probably have the discussion of how have they served us, what's been gleaned from that relationship. And one of the things that I did not bring up, and Mr. Carino, this kind of speaks to your acknowledgement of the process and what's transpired. We just went through the process of first really going through the process of saying, is this even legal, right? Mr. Smith, can we even have a lobbyist? We went through that exercise and we verified we can. So we did go through that process, but just kind of you stepped out for a minute. So what I was trying to do is, I think as we present to the board, or as this information goes to the board, we should distinguish between the state and the federal. All this conversation has been about the federal, and we just need to, have, separate conversations. But I understand your concern about the fact that they are somewhat tied.
Speaking of relationships, I think, especially going through our various studies from the state on merging the agency, we've had very good relationships with the advocacy group, but it is an objective statement that since we brought Caesar on board, we just interface very differently with Tallahassee and with our folks in D.C. We are paying attention to some of the performance metrics, and not to say the advocacy group is not meeting them, but looking at some peer contracts, there are performance metrics which we have not captured. I would point out that the depth of the reports which come back now, that Caesar is working very closely with Tallahassee. And it's not to say the studies weren't good that we got previously, but the information we get back now is very detailed and very personal. So the universe for which we wrote our contract 2.5 years ago is not the one in which we find ourselves operating.
Right.
So it doesn't mean the advocacy group is not the best contender for us, but we have a different team coming to bear, and it is an opportunity to make sure that what we're using our taxpayer dollars to bring back still aligns with what we think we need.
Sure.
So just to say.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point as far as, when you hit that threshold of, wow, do we renew or not? In other words, I think what you're saying is, sure, if there was an issue, some kind of negative, that might immediately go, oh, we need to go back onto the street. But there's also the changing arena and scope of what we do, different players. I think as we move this to the board again, I just want to reiterate, I think that the slides or any information should be presented where we have the state and the federal, and our thoughts and approaches on either one are independent of each other. And then I think what might also be important, it sounds like, Caesar, you did some research for Mr. Roche on the federal side. I think it would be good in a transparent way to maybe look at, what is, whether it's a summary or some type of information about our how things have been going with the advocacy group. Because from my charge, it's been all very positive. I think one of the points that I didn't make that I actually wanted to make when we were talking about the legality of lobbying was, we all get updates, legislative updates. And I think that, and the big question in the legal debate was, going and trying to lobby for taxpayer dollars. And I think we made the point that it's not just about that, it's about appropriations. But also there's the intelligence side and the relationship side. And one of the, whether you want to call it opportunity cost or qualitative value items that I think the advocacy group brings, and not just them, but that the firm in that role, is during this contract, they built things. And I think that as we go forward, we need to evaluate that very carefully, because if we switch horses, both on the federal or the state, what do we lose if the contract was ending and we had no other option, we had to go back on the street, we'd have no option. But we have the opportunity to look at a potential renewal so that we don't lose those qualitative. And Caesar, maybe, are you comfortable elaborating on that?
Well, and I'll chime in real
Sure.
quickly on that. Now, Al's the wet blanket, because we do have this wonderful, fantastic procurement process, but he's been putting up with both me and Caesar over the past few weeks, asking exactly the leeway that we have within our existing contract mechanism. By example, Pinellas just procures differently. They make different decisions with their policies. and they have the ability to substantively change. So they added a sub to their local lobbying contract last year, and they upped the dollar amount, I want to say, by $30,000. I don't even know what Al would do to me if I tried to do something like that, because within our procurement policy, we just don't have the ability to do that. So we did explore the option from a staff perspective of, with the additional oversight that we have from Caesar, could we add additional metrics? How much could we change or improve on that product without going out on the street? And because we are nice and conservative, we just don't have the opportunity if we wanted to put some more efficiencies in place. But again, we did look at that, and there's other agencies here in the state that do that. They add subs, they change the money. I want to say Pinellas even did that within the procurement window, because they added a sub after they accepted bids and changed the prices. As I see Al's face. And we just do our procurements differently. But we did pursue that as an opportunity to say, if we stay with the existing contractors on either option, what can we do? And because Al's team is really good at their job, the answer is just, with what we have, we can't do much. We can't change it.
Yeah, and I think, thank you. I think I'm definitely interested in, return on investment, and again, Caesar, maybe not today or at the board meeting. I think it would be good to have a look back and see what we got out of our investment with both firms.
I mean, correct. As I said before, full disclosure, I came in and kind of just had to be kind of baptized by fire by just going right into session. But with that being said, there were a lot of wins on the state side and a lot of successes that we can build off of that we were able to encounter this past legislative session. For instance, we are the lead agency in the state of Florida as far as CNG technology and CNG investment for that bridge technology. Now, we were able to continue our CNG rebate program. The CNG program has also become a bit more robust from $250,000 to $500,000. We have also had some outstanding relationships with legislators. For instance, to have the majority leader in the House, Dana Young, to submit an appropriations request, and to also have Senator Brandis, which is the chair of the Transportation Committee on the Senate side, to be able to be our champions for our appropriations ask. I think that resonates deeply as to how we've been able to move forward. And those are wins that we're going to be taking on to the following year. Now, obviously, we can't speak for all credible actors, and we can't speak to what people envision what should be done with the people's money of Florida. But I think moving forward, we have an opportunity to fashion something very, very robust and something special, especially since HART has a lot of innovative things that we're trying to accomplish. Another thing that you have to look at is how we're utilizing both firms and collaborating with what those firms bring as far as relationships. For instance, being able to put together that Tiger grant and to have almost every single level of government in the Tampa Bay region be supportive, that is a major win. To have the entire ball delegation of Hillsborough County, both political aisles, to say that we're supportive of this, and also to have legislators in Pinellas County and across the entire Tampa Bay region, and part of that with the Tampa Bay congressional delegation, that's a huge win for us, that people are talking about HART now, whereas previously maybe not so. So I think as we move forward, I think that there's great opportunities for us. Holland and I on a federal team also, I mean, the way that they know we're rally support across our 4 existing grant opportunities, that's a tremendous effort. But since this is somewhat of a novel position for HART to have a government relations specialist monitoring the 2 teams, I think that right now we have an opportunity to create something truly special for our organization. Now, with that being said, with the direction of board members, I can go back and be able to prepare a bit more of a robust presentation in more detail so that you would have the resources and the tools that you need to be able to go forward and make the proper decisions for the organization.
Thank you, Caesar. Mr. Carino?
That's fantastic, and I just want to give my simple thoughts on strategy here, just for what it's worth, right? So when I started on this board, we didn't have a terribly outgoing CEO. We didn't have a terribly outgoing team, and they were good, and I compliment them. They did a lot of great things, but they weren't terribly outgoing. We didn't have Caesar, and I don't think we did a terribly good job on with the legislative process in general. I feel like we're doing a much better job. I also feel like we have a much more outgoing CEO. We have Caesar, who, based on my experience, is very good and very outgoing. We have a board, I think, that is more outgoing and willing to step up. We have, I think, more ambitious plans for the future. And in my mind, being able to kind of create opportunities by building relationships between HART and our legislators and our legislative staff is an extremely important next step for us. So as I think about the lobbying efforts and the lobbying firms, groups that are able to help facilitate you guys building relationships, and I'm seeing relationships built, and I'm hearing about relationships being built that are very valuable. And I think that's going to be really, and this is my opinion, that's going to be the future of sort of HART and HART's lobbying and the ability to kind of generate the capital needed to do all the things in our plan that we need to do. It's really a much more self-directed effort, which isn't to say that we don't need lobbyists, and it's not to say that yours aren't great, but I'd like to see as part of the strategy, certainly, our team, our staff stepping up and playing a more prominent role in that process and building relationships directly between our organization and the folks who control the budgets for the state and federal government.
Yeah, and if I can play off that, Caesar, I think your role is critically important, and it's a new role, obviously, as you acknowledged. I think that and going back to the procurement process itself, I definitely support moving towards a staff evaluation committee. All the as was noted, I was involved in the one in 2014, kind of almost a baptism by fire. Hey, we need an ad hoc committee member. Will you help out, Director Melendez? And I did. But in all the procurements that I've seen in other agencies, it's typically staff, and I don't think you typically see board members. So I welcome this. I think this new approach would be healthier for us as a board because it does kind of clear everything out. I think the oversight's a good idea. I think maybe even more than one, perhaps, because but depending upon how that is, but at least one board member, but maybe potentially more, only because you're getting just the one viewpoint of whoever that board member happens to be. I don't know if there are any thoughts on that, or
I would defer to David on that.
yeah, policy wise, but just a question, Yeah, Mr. Roche.
Yeah, I'd just say to Caesar's offer for the presentation, I think that would go very well to have that conversation that Director Crino talked about, and where we can go over, give us an idea of, how the evaluation, what is needed if we feel comfortable, let's say, with the evaluation that's being proposed. So I don't know if it would be at the full board or if that would be something that would go to the legislative committee first. But yeah, I think it would be very helpful for discussion purposes.
Yeah, well, from a next step standpoint, Mr. Smith, given the board meeting coming up, where are we?
I think given our time constraints, this will be on the agenda for the board meeting in July. Okay. Is it the 18th of July?
Yes,
sir. Will it be as an action item, or what?
Yes.
Okay, and what will the action item be, just to recap?
The action item will be initially you need to decide whether or not you're going to renew the existing contracts. And if you're going to renew one or not the other, whatever comes out of that process, how you want to proceed. If you want to do a procurement anew in light of change in circumstances, not necessarily current performance, all the factors you heard, or whether you want to take it in-house, the board will have to make a policy decision on how it wants to proceed, and then we'll draft up the necessary documents.
Thank you. Will they? Would there be two different action items? Would it be a state and a federal?
Well, irrespective of whether they're in one item, you need to handle them both separately. I think there needs to be a vote to extend or not extend the state contract. There needs to be a vote to extend or not extend or exercise the option.
Okay.
Excuse me.
So they would not be tied?
They do not have to be tied. I know there's been some discussion about them being simultaneous. I don't understand the rationale for that.
I don't either,
really. So
just being frank.
But legally, you can handle them both separately. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Well, then what I would suggest is, if this is going to come up in the July 18th meeting, that we have Mr. Burns' presentation along with Caesar, maybe going a little bit more into the direction of kind of our historical look back.
I would agree. I think any information that can inform the board so they can make an informed decisions on separate items would be great. So, yeah. Oh, Mr.
Yeah,
Davis.
let me pile on. Mr. Smith, if we choose the road of renewing contracts, I assume that does not put us in any kind of situation where we would find a protest on CCNA for firms that would have liked to have the contract. In other words, by not putting it out on the street in a solicitation process, I assume we have the option to renew if that's one of the options.
You do, and that's an extremely risk-free decision in terms of being challenged.
I'm sorry, can you restate the whole?
You do not have to do a new RFP if you have an existing contract that allows you to exercise an extension. So there would be almost no risk to the board by exercising the option. It's not to suggest that's what you should do. I'm just responding that there's no risk associated with that. There's not a great deal of risk associated with not extending either and going out to a new RFP.
Okay. If I could play off that, just a quick question. As far as contract renewals, from a policy standpoint, how is that typically done? I know that this is and what's interesting about this is a contract that involves a lot of interaction with board members, right? The people, some, but we get a contract for, I don't know, parts for the buses. We don't interact with those people. But relative to the bigger picture, can you just kind of recap, the renewal, can this be done at the staff level? Can there, or just a quick?
Historically, this board has not delegated those decisions they consider to be, I think, significant for board. For example, the renewal of the legal services is done by this board. Right. The renewal for the lobbying services is done by this board. There are other contracts where there's an extension that is evaluated and determined at the staff level because the board has essentially approved the contract parameters that allow that decision. But given the sensitive nature of these sorts of services, it's always been brought to the board. What precipitated the issue was occasionally it seemed the renewal came up to you where you had no option because you couldn't get your RFP out on the street in time. So you either renewed or you went bare, so to speak, in terms of coverage.
Really?
So this is an effort to try to make sure you have the information far enough in advance, because if you don't want to extend, you have to go through a procurement, which takes time in order for Al to get it right. And our CEO is correct. He's very fastidious about those things.
Understood. Thank
we
you.
have this a list of contracts for a discussion item at the end of the committee meeting.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you both. Appreciate your time. All right. Well, next on the agenda are the committee action items, and considering the fact that we cannot take any action, I guess we will. I mean, we might as well just defer this to the board. Mr. Roast, are there any objections or comments?
Well, I was just going to say I had a question on item E.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have anything to report? I know we put the contract out. Have we made an award?
That is an excellent question. Thank you so much. The solicitation window, if it now is coming up to give an update, closed on Thursday at 3 p.m. And Mr. Burns?
Al Burns, Director of Procurement and Contracts Administration. We have received proposals. The term competitive, by FAR standard, is more than 2 proposals. We have received more than 2 proposals. This morning, in reviewing the proposals that have come in, we're doing something a little unique as far as confidentiality. There are multiple subs on a lot of these. I think one firm has approximately 8 subcontractors on theirs. So we're adding subcontractors as part of the conflict of interest confidentiality. Because we're in the solicitation process, I would like to kind of keep our comments at a minimum.
Sure.
But I will tell you that we do have competition in regards to that, and very nice firms. That is the point.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Okay. Any follow-up to that? Yeah, so I guess to recap, since we don't have a quorum, unless anyone would like to discuss any of the action items or anything within them, since we cannot take any items, and it's my understanding this would just go directly to the board and bypass us. That's correct, Mr. Smith?
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
So unless there are any other questions or thoughts on the action items, I believe we are done as far as that list. So moving on to the next, if there's any old business? Okay, seeing none. Any new business?
Mr. Chair, yes,
Yes, okay, and Ms.
I
Egan.
covered it. So at your places, you see a list of contracts coming up. Either they will expire or they have options that the board will see in the next year. And if Mr. Burns will not mind wearing out his shoes, he can come back up. When this board awards contracts, you authorize the staff to exercise the options. So you award for the entire, if it's a 5-year contract, for instance, a 3-year contract with 2 1-year options, once you make that award, almost under no circumstances do the options come back to you. You have authorized staff to exercise them. So as Mr. Smith noted previously, in years past, the board would see a contract and have questions on why this option been exercised, and you were at the point that if you didn't exercise, we would have no whatever that commodity was.
Right.
The contracts listed on the top of the page in bold are the ones this board has chosen to be involved directly in the award and evaluation process, so these come directly to you. Everything after this is something that staff is going to come back and address. If it is under the $100,000 threshold, you will not see it as an award. That is a spending limit that you've given to your CEOs. Anything over $100,000 you will see. The intent of this list was to show you for the next year coming up what is up. Anything in the next 6 months, if it's before December, the ship has sailed. We will not have the option to bring it back and discuss, but essentially anything from December of this year through the summer of next, we still have the opportunity to hear, do you want us to proceed differently? Again, there are very few things that have these options you would have to weigh in on. They're at the top of the page. But we just wanted to provide a list of all the things we know you might need to think about. We will, of course, go through our standard process. We will provide recommendations. And Mr. Burns, if you want to walk through the process of how we exercise options, that might be helpful.
I'd be glad to. The procurement process, or when it comes to exercising options or renewing a contract, the process is as follows. The project manager or the program manager for that particular contract is given a notification 6 months in advance of their contract expiring. If I receive notice back, they tell me, I inform them that they have 90 days for the solicitation process. That's a blanket statement for the agency as a whole. It's 90 days for the solicitation process. That does not account for committee and board action. Upon submitting, they submit a requisition to the system, and then we go through the appropriate solicitation process, whether it's RFP, request for proposal, RFQ, request for qualification, or IFD, invitation for bid, which is bottom line price. RFQ is used in Mr. Jacobs' arena for A&E services, and everything. RFPs are for like legislative consulting services. We go through the process. Once we receive bids and are prepared to make a recommendation for award, then a significant decision point is there. Whether or not it needs to come to the board of directors. And I conferred with David and my boss, the CFO, and it states in policy whether or not it's classified as routine or non-routine. Routine services do not have to come before the board of directors, i.e. parts for the buses. We buy hundreds of thousands of dollars of parts, whether it's for streetcar, fixed route, or the vans. Those routine contracts you don't see. Fuel is another example. You don't see that contract because it's designated as routine. All non-routine services, legislative, consulting, A&E, those contracts over $100,000 are the ones that you do see. So at a high level, 8,000-foot level, 6 months in advance, staff is notified that the contract is about to expire. They make a decision on whether or not they want to renew, even go out again, for your example, Mr. Josh, for, hey, we want to bring that in-house. So it's not always that we go back out for those services or goods. Once that decision is made, then we put it out for solicitation. After the solicitation or during the solicitation process, the decision point is on whether or not it's classified as routine or non-routine. At that point, me and my staff, we know whether or not we want to bring that or whether we have to bring that to committee and then subsequent to the board. If not, we go straight to award. Hopefully that was articulated.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Appreciate it. All right. Any other questions or comments? All right, with that, we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And welcome to the.
I'm glad that as soon as I came back.
The committee.